Hello, my name is James Byrne, and I'm going to continue sharing with you another episode today regarding why I believe Joseph Smith or Hiram Smith was not involved in any polygamy. This is an episode I've had to redo because the previous one was too long, and I want to keep all episodes to about that half an hour mark. And I'm just including something else I left out of the previous episode. And we're going to start again in sharing this document, which is based about Joseph Smith III, who is Joseph and Emma's son, eldest son. And I start with this quote because it gives the best idea. It's a long issue there that uh, in a document 17th of January 1893 where it's describing Emma Hale Smith, an elect lady. She fulfilled her wifing being called, and instead of reading the whole lot of this, I'm going to just read this small segment. My mother was one of the most poised women I ever met, of the purest and noblest intentions. However, she never submitted to make to be made a party to anything low, wrong, or evil, was absolutely fearless where the right was concerned, and was a just and generous mother. Her heart never changed towards her children, and her fidelity to them never wavered. It's needless to say that we loved her. I wanted to start with this because Emma Smith consistently denied that her husband Joseph was ever involved in polygamy. And if we're to believe her, it's it's clear she has testified over many occasions throughout her life that Joseph was not involved in it. Are we to say that she was a liar or pressured to say otherwise? I say not, because there's so many testimonies proven that not only did she, but many other people testified to Joseph not being involved in polygamy. Which brings the point about Utah affidavits. Joseph Smith Jr., who later would become president of the reorganized LDS in 1860, visits Utah to declare their father's monogamy. Their cousins was surprised at very little evidence. Joseph F. Smith, who would become eventually the Utah church president of the Latter-day Saints, um, set out in 1869, which is about 25 years after Joseph's death, seeking people to sign affidavits. Women who signed the affidavits were currently living in polygamous relationships, or they had some other self-interest or self-preservation to sign these documents. Several accounts show variants and contradictions to early journals and diaries. Let's read a quote from Joseph Smith III. It has been charged by certain ones advocating plural marriage that Emma was a thorn in Joseph's side, opposing his policies and leading him an ill life. This is absolutely not true. I was old enough at the time to know what was going on around me. I was closely associated with both my parents. The sleeping room I shared with my brothers was never more than a door away from where father and mother slept. Because of the great love and concern mother had for her children, she never wanted us far from her in order that she might be on hand to take care of us herself in case of necessity. So I am sure that if there ever were angry words between my parents, I should have known it, and I can truthfully state that nothing of the kind ever occurred. Father was a kindly man, emphatically a home-loving one, whose wife and children were very dear to him, and who was in turn loved and respected by them. So that's Joseph Smith III's testimony there. Let's go on to another one of his. Has been reported by those who pretended to be friends of father that mother was quarrelsome and was antagonistic to my father, frequently made trouble for him. I have this to say now, that tracing my memory back through the period of time in which my father was permitted to stay with his family, that I have never heard any quarrelling or harsh language between them under any circumstances, and that even disagreements between them were not conducted in a noisy or angry manner, that mother's language was quiet and temperate, and so was father's. We have a interview here that Joseph Smith III had taken in 1879 by that's Joseph Smith III of his mother Emma, and it is written in the Saints Herald. There you can see October the 1st, 1879, the last testimony of Sister Emma. In this document, it's considerably long here. I'm going to describe some of the key questions that he asks his mother, Emma. What about the revelation on polygamy? Did Joseph Smith have any like it? What of spiritual wifery? Answer: there was no revelation on either polygamy or spiritual wives. But that there would not. Besides, it was contrary to the will of heaven. No such thing as polygamy or spiritual wifery was taught publicly or privately before my husband's death, that I have now or ever had any knowledge of. Did he not have other wives than yourself? He had no other wife but me, nor did he, to my knowledge, ever have. At one time my husband came to me and asked if I had heard certain rumors about spiritual marriages or any of the kind, and assured me that if I had, that they were without foundation, that there was no such doctrine and never should be with his knowledge or consent. I know that he had no other wife or wives than myself, in any sense, either spiritual or otherwise. That's the written notes there that Joseph Smith III had during the interview. We go on now to the Temple Lot trial, where Joseph Smith III is questioned regarding his father Joseph's alleged marriage to Mellissa Lott. This is, as you can see here, the question, page after page with question after question, and I'm You can go through it. You can see the link for it there. I'm just going to pick out some key questions where the the reason for this Temple Lot trial taking place in 1891 or 1892 was to establish which church represented the old church that Joseph Smith had during his lifetime, or was the successor church to Joseph Smith. So it was um, also in regard to a temple lot part of property. There was a church called the Temple Lot Church, and they wanted to keep ground of that church, while the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints um, brought a court case to take that piece of land. So the Utah LDS Church came in on the side of the Temple Lot. And I say all of this because the trial was trying to establish which church closely resembled what Joseph Smith, the prophet, um, had. And the case came down on the side of the reorganized church because they did not believe in the practice of polygamy, while the Utah church under the leadership of Brigham Young did teach it and did practice it. Incidentally, though the reorganized church won the case, on a technicality, the Church of the Temple Lot kept possession of the land because they had, I think, something like squatters' rights, having been on that site for quite some time. Right, so we go in now. This is the one of the alleged wives of Joseph Smith was Mellissa Lott. So she was part of that court case, and Joseph Smith III is answering questions regarding her and her alleged marriage and what he came to know about it. So the lawyer asks if he knows about Mellissa Lott. He answers, yes, sir. And he knew the whole family. He mentions there John Mary, Martha, Melissa Alzina. And when did you see him? I saw him in the fall of 1885 in Utah Territory, Lehigh. And her married name now is Willis. And the lawyer asks him about meeting Mrs. Willis. And Joseph Smith answer says, if you will pardon me, I will say that in my crusade against polygamy, it had been stated that I would not dare face Mrs. Willis. And when I went to Lehigh preaching there, she was in the congregation of the first meeting, and I secured an introduction to her and asked her for an interview, and I went the next day at 10 o'clock by appointment to see her. That was in Lehigh. Yes, sir. Please state when this was. This was in 85, and I think in the latter part of October. Then the lawyer asks, what were your reasons for calling on her? Joseph answers, Well, sir, having known her in my boyhood, I was anxious to see her and especially anxious to find out, if I could, about what was stated in regard to her alleged connection with my father, and I went there and saw her and had a conversation with her, in which she did state that she was married to my father, but she stated also that she did not live with him as his wife. A lawyer asked, is that all that she stated in that connection? Answer, no, sir. After she had made that statement, I asked her the reason why she had not, and she said she did not think it was necessary, and I asked her a number of questions with regard to it, with the intention of asserting what the facts were in connection with it as near as I could, and she did not state that she lived with him as his wife, but on the contrary, distinctly affirmed that she did not live with him as his wife. I asked her also if he had ever treated her as a wife. She suggested that he did once, but nothing came of it, and asked her why, if she was properly married, why the relationship was not continued. And she said she did not think it was right. I asked her then if this took place in the mansion house or in the old house, and she said no, that it was not in the mansion house, that nothing ever went on in the old house or in the mansion house. She said that nothing of the kind ever took place there, and then I asked her, or stated to her, that it was said that she had several wives living, that he had several wives living there with him in the mansion house, and she said it was not so, that nothing of the kind was carried on there, or permitted at all. Now, of course, it is impossible for me to remember all that was said or passed between us, but that was the substance of what passed between us at that time and place. Lawyer question. Well, state anything and everything that was said in the conversation. Then the other lawyer is objecting, which judge overrules, and Joseph Smith then continues. Well, after asking her these questions, I asked her if my mother knew of this marriage that she alleged had taken place. What marriage do you refer to now? The marriage that was alleged to have taken place between herself and my father. I asked her if my mother knew that it had taken place or was aware of it in any way, and she said that mother was, that she had given her consent to it, that I asked her the question as to whether my mother was a truthful woman, whether she was a woman that would tell the truth, and she said she would, that her character, and that I said, suppose my mother should make me a statement in answer to a question, could I rely on what she said? And she said, you can, Joseph, you can, for if your mother told you anything, you can believe it to be true. And then I told her that my mother, in answer to my question I had asked her, had stated positively that my father had no wife but my mother Emma, and that he had never had any other woman in any sense as his wife, with her knowledge and consent, and that this woman Willis looked at me and she said, well, Joseph, if your mother told you that she knew nothing about it, um, now that was all in the same conversation, And then I told her that my mother had made that statement to me specifically, and she said, "You can rely on it then. Your mother knew nothing about it." That was the conversation you had with Mrs. Willis, formerly known as Mellissa Lott. Answer, yes, sir. Who was present during the conversation? Soon after that, her sister Mary and her sister Alzina came into the room, for they heard that I was there and was visiting Mellissa, I suppose. And so they came into the room to see me. Well, what was the said then? Well, we fell into a general conversation, of course. I did not question the woman directly any more, but in the course of the conversation, I turned to Mary and asked her if she knew where I could find any brothers and sisters there in the territory, for it was reported that I had a good many mothers there in the territory, and I would like to find some brothers and sisters, for I was kind of lonesome. Mary remarked that she had hunted the whole territory over for them and went every place where there was any report of the kind, and she could find no children. And then Alzina spoke up and said, "No, brother Joseph, I do not believe there is any chance for any." And then I turned to Mellissa Willis and I said, "You hear what your sisters say? What have you to say to it?" This is the other lawyer now objecting again, and he's overruled. Proceed, Mr. Smith. And Joseph Smith III answers, "Well then," Mrs. Willis immediately remarked in answer to my question that she thought the girls were right. Well, what did she say about it? She said, "Joseph, I expect they are right." And then I said, "I thank you, for I think that gives the case away." That was in effect what I remarked. The conversation was rather general after the girls came in, and having known them so well in the early days, I felt free to converse with them as I would with those I had known for years. I was under no kind of reticence or disinclination to talk with them, for they were very friendly, and we talked in a very friendly way. So that's the account of the interview. Prove, and this is the alleged wife of Joseph Smith, Mellissa Lott Willis, and it's proven to be, by her own admission, to be vague and just didn't happen. You see there in 20th of October 1885 in Joseph Smith III's diary, goes to Ira Willis Lott, had a chat, all assured me that father had no children. Let's go to the reminiscence there. There's about 4 different testimonies of all of this is all down there. And it talks about the Lott sisters. You can see it there, and it's in the Saints Herald. There's 4 links to it there. I was convinced that whatever the word married or sealed occurred in such testimonies regarding my father, it meant nothing more than that possibly these women had gone through some ceremony or covenant which they intended as an arrangement for association in the world to come, and could by no means have any reference whatsoever to marital rights in the flesh. The memoirs of President Joseph Smith III in 1885. Now, Joseph F. Smith, who would become the president of the Utah-based church, was about collecting affidavits. And here is the example of, we talked about Mellissa Lott, where he entered the wrong year. See there, Mellissa Lott, who was sworn in due form of law 20th day of September 1842, or is that 1843? So, like again, there was manufactured and dubious affidavits being done up in very odd circumstances, because as we showed in and can show in an episode on affidavits, some of these were missing dates, missing names, there were empty sections left blank, so to fill in like a default form. So there's a lot of mistrust in some of these things. When Mellissa Lott, as you saw there in the interview at the court trial, her testimony is dubious and uncertain, and making the case that there wasn't really a marriage, whatever arrangement it was. Now, this is Joseph Smith III quoting from another source, Thomas Lynn, saying, quote, before the tragedy at Carthage, he had attended a meeting in the 70s hall with ostensibly for high priests and elders. At this meeting, Uncle Hiram was a principal speaker, and there was strongly denounced the theory of polygamy or plural marriage, as its practice stated specifically and emphatically that such a doctrine was no part or parcel of the message that had been called to preach to the world, and he earnestly warned them against it. Joseph Smith III also shared the testimony of a brother, John Taylor. That is not the President John Taylor. This is Elder John Taylor, a different man by the same name. Brother Taylor's recollection, exactly, this is quoting Joseph Smith, tallies exactly with what of Thomas Lynn, as to the time when the meeting was held, the reason for it being held, and the denial and denunciation of the dogma of plural marriage they've made by Uncle Hiram. And so he cites Brother Taylor at the Temple Lot trial, where the same John Taylor testified, and his testimony is important because it corroborates several things about Hiram's fight against polygamy and his efforts to root out the secret polygamists, as Clayton recorded in his journal. This John Taylor's Temple Lot testimony, starting with question 62. Well, what were your duties in case you were found anybody with more than one wife? To report them. Report them to who? To report them to the president of the teachers' quorum. How many were there in the quorum? There were 24 in that quorum, and it was organized quorum, and our instructions were, if we found any case of that kind, to report them to the president of the teachers' quorum, and that president was to report them to Brother Hiram Smith, and that was the instructions Brother Hiram gave in the quorum. Brother Hiram went specifically to this teachers' quorum, Brother Taylor, who became an elder, must have been a teacher at the time, and he's telling what Brother Hiram told them. This testimony fully corroborates the fact that Hiram was trying to root out and trap secret polygamists. Question 158. I ask you, if after John C. Bennett was cut off from the church, did you hear anything there in Nauvoo about the secret wife system or polygamy being practiced there by anyone? You'll note that everyone knows about that spiritual wifery, polygamy, celestial plural marriage, that are all the same. In fact, remember Brigham Young, many of the early wives talked about spiritual wives, and that's what they called themselves, spiritual wives and spiritual children. It goes on for a long time, even much of this Temple Lot testimony. Many of the supposed wives of Joseph Smith described themselves as spiritual wives. That's the question about, did he hear anything about polygamy after John C. Bennett left? No, sir. After John C. Bennett left, should be should be some inverted commas there. No, sir. There was no polygamy. There was no talk of polygamy talked at there at any time. That is by the authorities. You understand me? That is what I say. No talk of any kind about that by the authorities. None at all. Joseph Smith and Hiram never taught polygamy, and there was no revelation on polygamy that I ever saw. No law, no revelation or polygamy on polygamy or celestial marriage of any of the kind, and the church was governed entirely a monogamy church from 1832, at the time I embraced the work, up to the time of Joseph's death. It was purely monogamous church that entire time. Right. One other question. 160. Well now, please pay attention to my question. You went a little beyond the question. My question is not the reference to Joseph and Hiram or what they taught, but my question is that there any talk by anyone about the doctrine of plural marriage or polygamy, as it is called? Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, there was a man by the name of Brown taught that doctrine. What was done with him as he was notified and cut off from the church? You know that to be the fact. Yes, sir. At this At this again, all of John Taylor's testimony checks out with contemporary evidence. The man by the name of Brown taught that he was cut off from the church, and there was another man by the name of Durfee went out to Leichhardt and told the people there that he thought the time would come that they would practice polygamy or the same doctrine in reference to plural wives that David and Solomon did. That is what this man called Durfee taught, and there was a man by the name of Hewitt heard it, and he came right away to Nauvoo, and he went to see Hiram about it, and he told Hiram about this man was teaching or preaching, and Hiram sat right down in the well curb and wrote a notice to him that such a doctrine wouldn't be taught in the church, and he wrote to him, I know that, for I saw the letter after he wrote it. Mr. Hewitt read it to me. You saw that letter, you say? Yes, sir, I saw the letter, and it was a severe rebuke. A severe rebuke. He didn't know that it had been printed in the paper, but he read the actual letter itself, unlike the testimonies from the polygamists. John Taylor's testimony is consistent and solidly backed up. So, contemporary evidence and documents, and it is completely ignored. We should give him another like him who give consistently testimony that backed up and collaborated by Nauvoo sources. should give them credibility over the problematic, inconsistent testimonies that contradict him and contradict the evidence. Those are the testimonies of the Utah polygamists. So, as I say, these people would have been at Thomas Lynn, this brother John Taylor, and others would have been at that meeting and given their testimony. So I thank you for listening, and don't want these episodes to go on further than approximately the 30 minutes. And we shall speak again in future episodes about the fact that polygamy is not of God. Joseph and Hiram did not preach it or practice it, and Joseph Smith III, the son of Emma and Joseph, denied his father had anything to do with it. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.